The whole give and when then format was also part of his work. He didn't create it himself. A lot of others helped him. Given I have no cheese. What a shame. So, this whole idea of acceptance test-driven development came out of the work of these guys. And basically what it boils down to is that we have testers work with analysts, with product owners, with developers early on. And we try to define what it is we're going to build as a set of examples of how the system will be used. Now, does that mean that we can't have anything else? Well, no, not really. I mean, if we're building something that has a UI, sure, we should go up and on a whiteboard and draw it out and talk about what it should look like. It's fine to put some other documentation or some other ideas together, but those other ideas or other artifacts that we create are not what we talk about when we talk about the system we're building. We collaborate around building something that describes the feature that everybody can know and understand. Up front. Once we know and understand that, the next step is to automate that. The idea of an acceptance test is that it is the definition of done. So in other words, once all of those scenarios or once all those steps, once those tests pass, this story is done. Now, how does this eliminate defects? Well, what I'm going to tell you right now is probably a little controversial, I guess, but the acceptance tests are supposed to define when the system is done. Now, clearly, if we all those tests pass, but whenever we start to use it, it crashes, yeah, that's a defect. There's no doubt about it, right? But if all the tests pass, and when we start to run the application, and all of a sudden it's doing something that was not specified, or we think it should be doing something that wasn't specified, that is not a defect. Because you see, whenever we agree that this story, these acceptance tests define done for this story, we can't change our definition after we deliver it. If all of a sudden we find something new that we want to happen in this software, that is a new story. That's why we include the product owner, why we include the business analyst, the customer, whoever needs to be involved in the definition of this. Communications is the key. So, there's a lot of ways that this can work. And everybody says, give me the prescription, give me the pattern that I could take everywhere. And to be honest, there isn't one. So I'm going to just talk about one idea of how this can work, but this doesn't have to be your idea. Can you read that? One thing that I've seen work is when the customer works with the analyst to sort of define the stories initially. Now, how far in advance do we do this? If some of you may have been in a session where I was on a panel earlier today where somebody said, we're defining the details of our stories a few iterations in advance. Well, I'm not certain that that's a good idea. I think if we're specifying the details of our stories a month before we're going to start to work on it, we're probably missing some opportunities. I'd much rather have the team focus on what we're working on right now. Let's deliver the details of the stories that we're going to be working on over the next week. The ones we're going to be working on in a month, we can work on them in a month. Right? So we get some basic idea of what it is that the story is supposed to contain. And then we start to work on it. The tester person works with the analyst, the product owner, and looks at it and says, what about this other scenario? What about this other idea? We didn't really capture that. Oh, you're right. And together they add some new scenarios, potentially. The developer looks at it and says, but what about this? And okay, that's fine too. What I'm saying here is that these are built by the team. The whole team is responsible for making sure that they get this right. And the whole team agrees that this is right. And then we automate those tests. And the developers get busy writing the code, making those tests pass. Once those tests pass, that story's done. That is my definition of acceptance test-driven development. I'm done. See you guys. So, I think we get a lot of benefit from doing that. First of all, I think that duplication that we get between the test plans, the automated tests, the requirements docs, we kind of can collapse that a little bit. We get people collaborating and talking more around the requirements of the system, so we'll definitely flesh out more ideas. I think having those tests delivered in development helps a lot around nailing some of those defects that occur all too often. My experience has been that once a team gets this and they get it well, their velocity, I guess, that's a term, right? Their velocity goes up quite a bit because this works to streamline what they're doing. Those of you who are doing this, what have you seen? One of you who raised your hand earlier and say that you're doing this, what have you seen? Nobody raised their hand. I know better than that. Yes?
I've seen that it's helped us flesh out some things that it helps make for better requirements. You know, some things that maybe the requirement writer didn't think of offhand. The tester who knows the business can think that up.
Okay.
Help them work that out.
Okay. Better requirements. Yeah. What else? Less defects. This thing must work. What else? Oh.
More work.
Huh?
More work, in some sense.
More work.
In some sense. I mean, it's a lot more upfront.
Mm-hmm.
Folks who were used to writing requirements and dropping those off now have to be involved for much longer.
People have to work together and collaborate. That's kind of icky. Right? Developers have to talk to testers, and testers have to talk with developers. It's like mixing dogs and cats, right? Except we know, yes.
More readable code.
More readable code. Very good. It's hard to believe, isn't it? That we end up with better code because we're more focused on what it is we need to deliver. I can tell you as a developer, when you get these vague requirements documents, you're scratching your head off and saying, what in the world does this mean? But whenever you have a concrete example that's laid out for you, you add 4 and 6, and it should result in 10, then you know when you've got it right? So since you know when you've got it right, your code is more concise and to the point. Less fluff. What else?
Take less time to test.
Fewer opportunities for the requirements to be misinterpreted. Okay. There still are opportunities for them to be misinterpreted, but once they're automated and once we know and understand, the tests pass or fail. You either get 10 or you get 11. And if we got 11, we know that we didn't understand it. Right? So you had something too?
Less time to test.
Less time to test.
What will be?
My experience has been that once we get proficient with the tools that do this, that a tester can produce the tests in a fraction of the time it takes the developers to write the code. And so it has a really interesting effect, which is that it allows the tester to refocus on things that are much higher value to the business. This whole manual testing of software is not valuable. It's laborious. And it doesn't, the cost is, I heard somebody say one time that we cannot afford to do manual testing anymore. If we can automate these tests and have all the grunt work done by a machine, we could focus on a more structured exploratory testing, which is very high value, high return to the business. Somebody up here had their hand up, so. Yes?
Yeah, if you make the analysts write or work with you on the tests, they're less likely to add gold plating to it. It's more work for them to.
Exactly. So something else happens, and this was touched on briefly this morning, which is that when we get developers and testers working together, they start to understand each other a little bit better. And the developers can help the testers that are struggling with automation learn how to do this better, right? And at the same time, the testers can help the developers understand what it means to build more testable code. What else? Anything else? So, I had an interesting couple of years. I'm a developer by background, and I've been an Agile coach for about 6.5 years or so. And I saw a very interesting pattern as I was working with teams. I would go in and work with a new company, a new team, and they were completely fine with me terrorizing the developers. They said, let's do test-driven development, let's do pair programming, let's write tests before our code, let's do all of these things. But when it came time to work with the testers, again and again, I got this message, no. We can't change the way we're testing our software. There were a few reasons why. Sometimes people thought, well, our testers have been doing manual testing for years. They can't learn this automation stuff. They can't learn this. Or they know the business. They might get mad and leave. Where would we be if they left? Time and time again, though, when I would go work with a team, the testing would be the bottleneck. We would streamline the developers, and we would start producing more and more code, and the quality would be pretty high. And yet, testing would be our bottleneck completely. We could not push anything through testing. And I said, but let me work with them. Let's do it. No. You can't touch those guys. We can't do that. One time, somebody made a mistake of telling me that I couldn't do that. And I decided to try something like what we've just talked about. And we had a really interesting success. It went very well to a point where testing was not the bottleneck at all. In fact, they had more time than what they needed. They were able to get more and more involved in the specification up front. And I was just shocked. It just so happened that on that team, one of the testers had this lady on the team. She picked this up and she was sharp and she was aggressive and she ran with this. And I kept asking myself, was this successful because she knew what she was doing and she really tackled this? Or was this successful because this process works? So the very next team, I tried it again, and it worked. And we kept trying this, and other people at Lean Dog kept trying this. And over time, what we found is that we don't know of a better way, first of all, to help a team communicate and collaborate around a set of requirements, and at the same time to test the software, than to use this practice. So, does anybody here have defects in their software? Okay, one or two of you. Well, for those of you who raised your hand, I'm going to tell you something, and it's pretty shocking, but it's true. It is very, very